So our next speaker is a recovering financial and government security hacker turned professor of neuroscience and business. He's also a science consultant for Hollywood. His hacking background led him to pursue non-traditional ways to investigate the brain. Most notably, he's been working with patients undergoing brain surgery to study behavior, emotion, decision-making, and dreams by directly recording the activity of individual neurons using electrodes implanted in the patient's brains. So please join me in welcoming Professor of Neuroscience and Business from Kellogg School of Management, Moran Cerf. Thanks, Moran.
Thank you. All right. So I am indeed a neuroscientist. I spent the last 15 years studying the brain, but no matter how much I spend studying the brain, I still will be known as a guy who used to rob bank back in the beginning of the 2000s. And the only option I had was to start owning it. So in the last couple of years, I've been starting to combine my knowledge of how hacking works and how we actually can penetrate systems and change them to the study of neuroscience. What I want to talk to you about today is specifically not just about hacking the brain as a whole, but focusing on memory. And what we learned in the last maybe decade, mostly 5 years, about memory that changes our understanding of how our lives go in the back of our brain, and also what we can do to change your behavior, create new narratives, and actually shed lights on how you think about yourself by tackling this one component of your brain, which is your memory. So the main understanding that really changes how we think about memory is the shift from the old-fashioned view, which is that memories are kind of like a file in a drawer, to more like an icon on an iPhone. Here's what I mean by that. For many, many decades, the belief among neuroscientists was that actually when you go to an experience, you store it in your brain, you save it in some location in your brain, and from then on, when you need this, you load this file, talk about your memory, experience it again, and then put it back in the file drawer. What we learned in the last, say, decade, 15 years at most, is that actually memories are a little bit different. When they're in your brain, they're saved once, but then every time you use them, you change them. So the idea is the following. Right now, you listen to me. Presumably, some content that you're experiencing penetrates your brain and gets saved in the form of a memory. If tomorrow someone asks you to tell them the story about today's talk, what you will do is you load the memory, and in loading it, you don't just tell the story and keep it the way it was. You actually have it kind of like an icon on an iPhone floating. And when it's floating, it's actually vulnerable. As in, whatever emotions you go through at the moment when you experience talking about the memory, whatever feelings you have, whatever thoughts you have, actually leak into the memory. They bleed in, and then when you're done talking about it, you resave it with the modified version. Which means that if in 3 days from now, someone asks you the same question, tell me about the talk, you won't load the original one, you will load the modified version. So every time you use a memory, you actually open it up, change it a little bit with the current experience, and resave it, which means that memories are malleable. They keep changing all the time. Now, this is not a bug in the system. This is a feature. This is how our brain allows us to actually change and evolve over time. This is why when something bad happens, we don't just relive it all the time. We actually change. We remember without reliving. This is why therapy works. If you go to a therapist, say your girlfriend broke up with you, you're feeling really bad. You go to the therapist, she asks you to tell her the story. You load the memory and you tell the story. As you tell the story, they might say something like, well, you know, for a while, he told me that he didn't really feel good about his relationship, or something was bad. And actually, they inject a new thought into the memory, which you then save. And when you come back a week after and you tell the same story, you now load it again and change it again. And this is why over time, you manage to change things. This is how we deal with trauma. PTSD isn't always the same because we can go through experiences that change things and make us who we are. In many ways, when people are asked about their life, they describe it mostly when it comes to choices. We say, I chose in the supermarket to buy Colgate rather than Crest, and this is why, because I like whitening, and the price was better, and the packaging was nicer, and we tell our stories by our actions. But in fact, what we know more and more is that the actions are momentarily. And then they get saved, and then they become a memory. And what actually is happening in our brain most of the time is that we weave those memories into a narrative, and the narrative that we make out of our past is our experience of ourselves. It's not the choices one by one, it's how we remember them and how we get to tell a story about them. And this means that we can't really believe our own thoughts. If you think about it from the point of view of a hacker, the brain isn't just one solid machine that works together. It's made of many compartments. There's the memory area, the emotions area, the decisions area, and each of them is independent, and information moves from one to another. But if we can actually come between and change something, the memory area would think it sent information, and it wouldn't know that it didn't get to the other side. This is what allowed us in the last couple of years to actually start thinking about memory as a tool that we can change. So we can have things like have a person load their memory by telling a story. We ask them, tell me about your childhood. And as they load the memory, we inject a drug that stops it from being resaved. And in doing so, this was the last time they told their story, because it would never be resaved. The memory thinks it's going back to its place, but something blocks it from getting to the underground layer, and then it gets disappeared. Now, this is done in the last couple of years in many ways. There are studies with mice that show that you can actually have the mouse go through an experience. It loads the experience in its memory to know what's coming next, and then you inject the pharmaceutical that stops it from being saved, and after one trial, the mouse forgets something that it learned. Erasing memories. We can also use optogenetics, a tool that actually injects activity in some neurons using light to stop the same process. As long as we know when a memory is being loaded and when it's stopped being used and about to be saved and inject the activity at that moment, we can actually erase memories. Now, erasing memories, of course, is kind of the story of science fiction, but in fact, in many ways, we know that this allows us to change lives, change our narratives, but also it allows us to create new ones that will alter our trajectory of time. All we have when it comes to telling our story is a narrative that's logging memory after memory and weaving them all into one story. If we can start erasing part of the story and putting a new one, we can actually change your story. Now, it's not new that we can actually inject memories. Since the 70s, there's been work by psychologists that show that if I can convince you that something that didn't happen actually happened, by telling you stories, by actually making you see pictures of the past that we created for you but you believe are true, you can actually, in your mind, do this effect and change your narrative and believe something that didn't happen or remove something that wasn't before. But now we have the tools to do it specifically, with one target memory and without you being involved. We can actually do that to you. Now, mostly up to now, it was done with animals. Studies with mice are the most common ones where memories are being created and erased. But we have the same idea of how to do it with humans right now, and there are some suggestions that we can actually play this game by which we look at all the parts of your brain, we see who talks to who, and we use what hackers know as man in the middle. We put something in between that blocks your memory from going from one place to another, and in doing so erase the memory, or we do something we call race condition, which is we inject two memories at the same time, and we hope that your brain will pick the first one, which is ours, rather than the one that came from you. And what's amazing about your brain is that it always trusts itself. So whatever is in your brain, in the form of a memory, you would never challenge. You would never say, you know what, I'm not sure I had breakfast today. If it's in your memory, you trust it. The one defense system we have is that we believe everything happens in our brain. So now that neuroscientists can actually play with that, we can indeed change your perception. Now, why is it interesting? Because it doesn't require drugs or optogenetics. We can actually do it in very few seconds with each and every one of you. And here's an example of something we did a few years ago. In a simple study, 2010, people come to the lab. There was an experimenter sitting in the back and asked to make choices, simple choices that you all can do instantly without thinking much. For instance, in this example, they're shown two cards, and the experimenter asked them to tell him or her which person in the pictures they find more attractive. You can all do it right now. You look at the pictures and you say, I don't know, maybe the guy on the left. Fine, you say, I like the guy on the left. The experimenter hands you the card you picked and says, hold the card in your hand and explain to me in one sentence why you picked this person. So you hold the card and you might say, well, he's smiling and I like people who smile, so this is why I chose this one. Fantastic. Here's two new choices. Two different people. Again, make a choice. Who do you find more attractive? This time you say left, you get the card, you explain. Two new options, right, hold the card, explain. For about half an hour, you see multiple pairs of cards. All you do is just explain why you made a choice. But here is where this experiment becomes interesting. There's one trick that happens here. Every now and then, in about 1 in every 20 trials, the guy in the back, the person who was dealing the cards, wasn't just a regular guy who was a magician, and he would give you, using sleight of hands, the card you didn't select. So you picked this one, he would give you the other one. And two interesting things happened. First, people rarely noticed. People rarely said, I picked this one, you gave me the other one. But more interesting, they then went and explained why this was their choice. So here's the moment that I'm talking about. You choose A, I give you B, you take B and you explain to me why this was your choice. And from that moment on, you will always believe that choice B was the choice, and you're going to have arguments for it. If I ask you a week later, you will still leave this choice. And think about it in the context of business, right? You go to the supermarket, you have the shelf, and Colgate is on the right, and Crest is on the left, and you look at all the options, and you try to think with an unbiased thought, just pure logic, which one you want, and you pick that one. You put it in your basket, and you start roaming the supermarket, buying more things, and somewhere between the moment you picked one and the checkout, I sneak into your basket and I change the Colgate with Crest. If you don't notice that, which is often the case when you have many, many choices in life and they're not important, you will get to the checkout, you will buy whatever I put there, and if I grabbed you outside and say, focus group, tell me why you chose Crest, you will come up with an answer. And from then on, you will leave this answer and you will change your narrative. I just created a fork in your road that you will defend fiercely because you always believe everything that happens in your own brain. Now, this is a 5 seconds gap. Choice is happening at one point, stored in memory, and then you come up and try to explain it. And you always trust your brain. So if you trust your brain and you can't trust your brain because you just think that it's one solid thing and you don't know that things can go inside, who can you trust? Well, you can trust neuroscientists because in the last 15 years, neuroscientists are the ones who actually start to poke inside your brain and look at your memories and try to see the raw version of your memories. There's kind of a cynical joke among neuroscientists that if memories keep changing all the time you use them, then the best memories are actually kept in the brains of people with Alzheimer because they can't really change them the way they are. Well, now neuroscience can actually look in the brain of people like that and actually see the original memory before it changed. So how is it done? Well, there are many ways to look at the brain. You just heard about one of them. The way I've been looking at memories for the last 15 years is by actually poking inside the brain, literally. What we do is we work with patients who undergo brain surgery, and during the surgery, they're kept awake, and electrodes are placed in their brain to understand how whatever problem they have manifests itself. And then we also say to the guy, you know, you're going to be here for the next couple of hours, maybe days, maybe weeks, with the brain open. Do you mind letting us also ask you questions about your preferences, Colgate versus Crest, while we have electrodes in your brain, and see how you think about them and how you remember them? So, Neuroscience 101, if you were to zoom someone's brain, what you would see inside is a forest of little cells called neurons, and they all are very close to each other. And if you listen to them, they sound something like this. No sound. Okay. Let me see if I can fix it on my end. I'm going to make it sound for you. If you listen to one neuron with a microphone inside your head, it sounds like this. This firing, this spikes of activity in the brain is how cells code concepts. When you think about something, when you care about something in the world, the way the brain codes this is using those bursts of activity that we call firing. The faster and higher frequency it is, typically, the more we care about the concept. So all we want to do, as neuroscientists, is actually have the patient sit there. I'm going to show you a picture of the brain, and I'm going to skip it quickly. While they're being operated on, stick wires inside their brain, microphones, have them sit in front of a computer and watch movies. I'm going to skip this one quickly. Watch movies or watch content, and listen to the cells speak, and try to see if there's one cell that becomes super active when the patient sees something. And then we can tell what this cell codes for. This is looking at memories directly. So hopefully the sound's going to work right now. What I'm going to show you right now is basically the movies that the patient is seeing. What you're going to hear below is the sound of one individual cell in this woman's brain while she sees those movies. Hopefully you can use that to understand what this particular cell cares about. So here's how it sounds. Imagine that there's a sound. I'm going to make it myself. Oh, actually good. Okay, you see the movies. Tick. Tick, tick. And now it comes. Okay, this is one cell in this woman's brain that codes the thought, the memory, the concept of Marilyn Monroe. Every time she thinks of Marilyn Monroe, the cell fires. And in fact, if you right now knew who this woman was, in all of your brains, the same thing happened. There was a cell, multiple cells, many, many hundreds, thousands, or maybe millions of cells that fired simultaneously, telling you this is Marilyn Monroe. This is a memory inside your brain. Now, what's amazing about those memories is that they are activated regardless of your thoughts. What I mean by that is that they don't need the visual. You don't need to see Marilyn Monroe to actually have those thoughts. You can just close your eyes and imagine or think or remember Marilyn Monroe, and the cell will fire the same way. We know it because a colleague of mine actually ran a study where she showed people those images and then had them a few hours later sit in their bed, eyes closed, and asked to just recall from their memory the movies that they've seen earlier. And what you will see is that as the patient starts, still no sounds, as the patient actually recalls things she has seen, the cell will fire, and in fact it will fire seconds before she actually says the word Marilyn Monroe. I'm going to do it again. Tick, 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 tick. Okay, so about 2 seconds before she speaks, we can see her memory in action. And this, again, happens in all your brains. If I had electrodes in all of your brains right now, every time you have a memory coming up, we could see it seconds, milliseconds before you experience that. And that's remarkable because we experience life in real time. We think that when I speak to you right now, I feel that my words come out when I think them. I don't really think that my brain prior sets the language and the adjectives and the verbs, puts them together and sends them. When I speak, I feel it happens. Me and you are in many ways witnesses to my brain at the same time. It's only that I own it because it came out of my mouth. So once we could look at memories and find them using electrodes in their brain, we can start actually doing fancy stuff, like, for instance, visualize them. We can have you close your eyes and remember things like Marilyn Monroe in various ways and forms, and we can just show on the screen your thoughts. Now, this is high precision memories. We don't visualize what we see from your areas that kind of code the vision. We actually look at your memories directly from the center of your brain, and when you remember it, I know it. It's 100% accuracy. Every memory that I found when you're awake, I can now, when you close your eyes, look at and visualize. And once you can do that, we can actually look at changing things. So being a hacker, it's not just like about getting to the bank and seeing, you actually want to also move the money. And when it comes to changing, we have various things we want to do when it comes to changing. We can actually erase memories, like I mentioned before. We can also activate those cells and actually make your brain kind of elicit the thought of something. This is a little bit harder, but we have to activate a lot of cells. And mostly, we can actually use the fact that your brain only creates narratives from your experiences rather than believe them as it is to change your behavior. And in the last 4 years, there's been a movement among neuroscientists to shift to a moment in your life where your guards are down, your memories are still there, and actually use it to change your memories and actually create different experiences. And this is your sleep. When you go to sleep, your brain isn't off. It's actually even more active than when you're awake. In many ways, it does a lot of things. And sleep is not a uniform thing. It's not that sleep is just like you go to sleep and for 9 hours you're sleeping. It actually has many components. There are moments where your brain kind of reactivates stuff. There's a moment where your brain simulates futures. We call those dreams. There are moments where your brain actually looks at all events of the day, picks the ones that are important and strengthens them, and picks the ones that are less important and erases them or just compresses them. So if you walked from your home to the supermarket and you did 100 steps, you don't need to remember any step. The entire experience is compressed into one memory, I walked to the supermarket. But if you had a car accident, every fraction of a second might be stored differently so you can remember everything. So what we learned in the last 4 years is that we can actually use simple readings of the brain to identify when is the moment that your brain actually looks at memories and reshuffles them and decides which are important and which are not. And then we can target your brain using external stimulations and change things. For instance, we can change behavior. So one of the classical studies that made a lot of headlines in the last couple of years was one where people essentially went to sleep. And when they were sleeping, the moment where their brain assesses the memories was used to inject the smell of nicotine and make their brain essentially focus from all the memories on the ones about smoking. So now their brain kind of reevaluates smoking, and then they injected the smell of rotten eggs into the person's brain using activation of smells, which actually makes you look at smoking and seeing whether you like it or not. It activates the negative feelings toward that. You do it enough time overnight in a specific window, and the person wakes up, and suddenly they have different feelings about smoking. They want it less. So this was the most extreme version of changing behavior over a 90-minute nap, if you just target the right moment. So now we know that we can actually look at your memories, change them, and in doing so, we'll make you wake up with different experiences. And you would never attribute that to your memory change. You would just say, this is what I want right now. There's a group now that looks at ways to deal with Ptsd. Essentially, instead of going to a therapist and talking about your memories, having her or him change things, save them, and coming a week after, we do the entire thing overnight. So we use sounds that would activate your feeling of the explosion of the tank in Afghanistan, and immediately inject smells of sound that would be soothing, and resave the memory differently enough times so you wake up and you actually are able to remember without reliving. One of the hallmarks of changing behavior and changing memories is actually the idea of strengthening them. we can't yet have you go to sleep and wake up knowing Kung Fu, which is what we always wanted. We can actually, though, have you learn something when you're awake. And when you're sleeping, we can actually make your brain rehearse that, so we'll wake up knowing it better. So you have to learn the French Revolution Wikipedia page by heart when you're awake, but you go to sleep, we can actually play it again to you in the right moment, and we'll make your brain strengthen the memory, so you wake up and actually remember it better. And also, we're looking right now at ways to basically see how experiences work in the brain by having people that are sleeping side by side experience the same content and looking at how similar the memories are, and we can know whether you and I are actually experiencing the same concept when the memories are coming to you. So the idea is that we are now playing with memories overnight in specific windows and make you wake up a different person. Now, the studies on looking at memories basically involved any type of changes of memory, erasing them, creating them, changing them. One group is working right now with mice on bypassing them. So the idea here is to actually fix Alzheimer, because essentially Alzheimer means that the bridge to your memories is broken. So what they do is they take the mouse and they put a chip inside the mouse's brain that actually reads the activity from the inside of the bridge and the outside while the mouse is still okay. Then they induce Alzheimer, and essentially they take out the biological aspect of the brain, but they keep the bridge working the same way. And what we see is that we can actually slow down or even actually halt entirely the idea of Alzheimer just by bypassing the memories. But the key thing that I found important was the changing behavior, because this touches on the thing that I find most interesting, which is we are changing futures of people by changing their memories. Memories aren't just things we create when we are alive. They're actually something we pass to different generations and we change over time. So when a baby is born, day one, they're already a little bit startled by loud sounds. When a monkey is born, if you show it after 2 days a picture of a snake, it immediately gets scared. It's because somehow, historically, its ancestors were maybe attacked by snakes and died, and those who survived managed to have kids, and this is the descendant of those ancestors. So he is born already in his brain with memories of the past that allow him to avoid things that are very, very risky for it. You don't have to learn anything in your life. Some memories just are passed through us in generations. Now, historically, if you take humans, for instance, those who stood at the top of the building and jumped were actually have kids, and that's why we have fear of heights as we were born without the need to be told if you jump, you're gonna injure yourself. Now, for the first time, we can actually create realities that allow us to experience the fall of the cliff without dying, which actually for us feels like a small change of memories, but if we do it over time and we actually change the brain itself, we can now pass it to different generations who are going to be born with different experiences of the world. And this is kind of one of the interesting but also scary ideas of what we can do right now. We can actually play with brains, change them when we're alive, and think that we're going to end with our life, but actually pass it further. So if you think about virtual reality, for instance, we can have a person learn something. Wish there was sound for that. I can't really replicate the sound that comes from this one. But the point is that this guy isn't just experiencing fear right now, he also changes his brain. And if you do it enough time, his brain is going to actually... If you do it enough time... This is the sound, but in delay. If you do it enough time, you will actually change this person's brain to the extent that he can actually now pass knowledge that he wasn't able to pass before. So I think that where I'm going to end is that this is not just about learning how the memory creates who we are. What we learn essentially is that we are the sum of our memories. The story we tell is the sum of our memories. Who we think we are isn't our choices, but the memories. But the key creepy thing that we're doing right now that I think would even take it further, and that's where I was going to tell you about the future, is that we're now starting to push the gap between being alive and being dead when it comes to our memories. So at least you might say to yourself, you know what, my memories are done when I'm dead. One of the studies we're trying to play with right now is one where we actually take dead people's brain and see what they can do after you're no longer there. So the idea is that when you die, if you die at noon, your brain is dead, but because we have components, it means that one component, the one that actually makes you alive, is dead, but some of your brain is still active. There's still enough juice there to do things. So we can take slices of your brain and stimulate them and see what you can do after you're not there. Think about that in terms of like a machine learning, right? Your brain can do super smart machine learning computations. We can take the brain part that actually identifies cats and have a dead person's brain for the next 7 hours until it actually decays entirely, tell if there's a cat in the video or not. In the same way, when we look for subjects for this study, we often are told, wait, if you look at my brain and you make it do things when I'm dead, are my memories fair game? And in many ways, we don't know the answer to that because we didn't look at this memory and we didn't really know what it means, but it means that our memories are now one more component that sits in our brain that we might be able to play with after you die. And if we look at the studies that happen right now, where we think of downloading memories and actually changing them, we can now finding ways to actually keep some of the things we can read from your brain, even after you're no longer there, and store a part of you when you're no longer with us. And this really pushes boundaries of what it means to be a human anymore, to be alive. If your memories are there, and if I told you earlier that in many ways our story is mostly our memories, it's not really our choices, but it's how we perceive them, we can now somehow extend who you are beyond what we know about. And that, I think, is the interesting component we have right now. We have access to the essence of who you are, to your consciousness, that we can extend by just playing with the one element of your brain that is the thing that you weave into your own story. Thank you.